Okay, so hello everyone. We are live with Monitora webinar number 5. Today we have a very special guest. First of all, I'm your host, I'm Agostinho Baroni. I work at Monitora for more than 5 years. And today we'll be talking with an experienced game developer from UK, which is graduated from the University of Salford in computer and video games, worked in several companies already, game developers, especially I would say Traveler's Tales, which is known today as TT Games, and also Crytek UK. Then afterwards we can talk a little bit more about each one of these phases of your career. He also now owns a company, his own studio, which is called Big Evil Corp. And he has already released a game called Tanglewood, which is available both on Steam and GOG.com, and also itch.io. And well, I think I will start by this. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here today with us, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing very fine, thank you. And hello, everybody.
Thank you, Matt. So first of all, to kickstart our webinar, I would like to ask you something that I am a bit curious about, which is, so you have went to the University of Computer and Video Games, and me and I think most of the people here went to courses like computer science, computer engineering, software development analysis, and stuff like that. In your view, which is the difference, which is the gap between a specific course like the one you attended and the regular ones? Which kinds of things specific to game development you learned there?
The games course I took was, you'd say it's game specific, but each individual discipline was quite watered down because there were just so many subjects to cover. The course covered some programming, some 2D art, some 3D art, level design, narrative design. There were modules on publishing, on legal aspects. There was music composition, which is quite a lot of subjects to cover. And you can do any one of those subjects as its own complete university course, something like 3D design. There's an entire university course for 3D design, but when you have to plug it into a games module, it's very slightly watered down. So you get a very wide spread of knowledge, but it's quite difficult to specialize on any one subject, which is one of the difficulties I found with this type of course. Towards the end of the course, I got more and more into programming, so I tried my best to specialize into programming. But the end result, the end grade, is how well you do on all of those subjects, which makes it a little bit tricky if you're not good at pretty much everything to do with games and not one subject like 3D art or something. Whereas a computer science course with a games module attached to it is very specialized towards the programming element, hardware studies, and you probably learn some assembly languages or some higher level programming. And that's what you do for the majority of your course. And you'd get very good at that, very specialized at that. But you'd also learn how to apply it to games as well. So you'll be able to learn a bit about engine programming or basic games programming, stuff like that. So it depends on the kind of person you are, really. And more importantly, if you know precisely which part of games you want to go into. If you know you want to be a games designer, but you don't really know if you want to do programming or texture design or level design, then the course I did is probably the type for you. But if you want to be a programmer, then you should very definitely be doing computer science with games bolted on the side.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. And I believe probably at the end of the course, I think you joined some kind of internship program and you begin to work on Smash Mouth games in 2009. That was it?
Yeah, that was it was just a 3-month placement, that one. That was working on the XNA program on Xbox 360, which was a way of allowing normal people to program for their own home consoles, which is a really good program that Microsoft ran back in the late 2000s. So it was a C# based engine they gave you. And you could code directly for the Xbox 360 platform and deploy and debug your code on your own retail console, which for a student was absolutely fantastic. It meant we got some real industry console experience right in our own homes. And the university, one of the lecturers at the university ran a placement based on this, where they set up a small studio and they had us programming Xbox 360 stuff as a placement.
Okay, understood. Yeah, I remember that in the same year, 2009, I think I participated in a competition here in São Carlos at the University of São Paulo. It was called Global Game Jam, and we used XNA and all that to code. We didn't port it to Xbox 360. I know that you had some kind of management to do with the objects because I think it used a smaller version of the framework, I believe. But I had a little bit of toying with it for some time. So after this initial experience, how did you end up at Traveler's Tales?
It's a really boring job. I applied for it and then I got the job. There you go. It was. I got quite lucky in my course. A lot of people were struggling to find not only the industry placements but also the jobs immediately after graduating. I'm not entirely sure why I was so special and how I managed to get that job. There weren't many going at TT, but I'm really grateful that they gave me a chance. I think it had something to do with the fact that we spent half the interview talking about Sonic the Hedgehog. That may have helped my case. So yeah, a good portfolio helps, definitely. During my time at university, I was writing my own game engine from scratch, including all the level design tools, all the build scripts and things like that. It was a cross-platform engine that worked on Windows, Mac and Linux as well. And I think they were quite impressed by that. That was my only portfolio piece, but it was quite a big and substantial one. A lot of other people on the course were using off-the-shelf engines. At the time, we had something like Ogre 3D. Unity was at its early stages. And something like Unreal Tournament 2004, you could mod. And I think to Traveler's Tales as a company that code their own engine rather than use off-the-shelf ones, I think that was a little bit more impressive to them, that I'd written my own stuff and used that in my portfolio. So I guess it depends on the type of company you're applying to, really. A lot of studios these days are using off-the-shelf engines like Unreal 4, Unity or Godot. So it's best research the company you want to apply for first, figure out what they want to see.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, already lots of interesting pieces of information in your answers. One thing that I think I need to provide here is a little bit of context in exactly what is TT Games or Traveler's Tales. They had been working with, I would say, AAA games since the 90s, right? I believe probably a landmark for them was to work in Mickey Mania in 1994 for the Disney already. So the company, when you joined them, they already had like a long history with AAA games, working with big publishers, big studios. how was the environment there when you joined it? Because the company already had this name. For those who don't know, Traveler's Tales already since the beginning. They were known for having very optimized games, games which had some special features, which were pushing the hardware, as we say. So when you joined there, what did you find inside Traveler's Tales? What kind of environment was there?
It was busy, it was messy, it was scrappy. There were always 4 or 5 projects always going on at once, so it was crazy, absolutely crazy at TT Games. They threw everything into their work. Very, very busy office, lots of people involved. Really strange code base. It's the same code base they've been using since the PS2 days when they released the first Lego Star Wars. And instead of rewrite it when the Xbox 360 or the Xbox One came out, they bolted onto it. So it was one of the strangest and best code bases I've ever worked with, because there was such a history to it. Even by the time the PlayStation 4 came out, you could still search the code base and find PS2 code in there, which is great to look at. So yeah, it was very, very busy company is probably the best way I can describe it. So much going on, so many different departments, so many different games, and of course so many different platforms they were working on at the time. They always spanned 2 generations. So at the time I was there, it was the Nintendo Wii, the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, as well as the newly introduced platforms that had just come into the Xbox One, the PlayStation 4, the Wii U, plus PC and Mac ports, as well as some little devices like I think we support the NVIDIA Shield, and then the PS Vita, the Nintendo 3DS. So that's what 10, 11 platforms that any one game goes onto. So it was crazy, absolutely crazy. It was a huge testing department. Lots of machines. It was very hot in there because hundreds of computers on in any one room at any one time. So we had a big bill for air conditioning. But yeah, busy is the best way I can describe Traveler's Tales.
Okay, thank you so much. Now getting a little more into the specifics, like as I said to you previously, a lot of people here are interested in the testing details. So for an example, you mentioned many platforms there. I understand that you probably had tools that you coded the engine or the game, and then you could at least try to have something already generated for another platform. But let's say, as you said, you had Xbox 360 and Nintendo Wii at the same time. We know that there is a huge gap in terms of hardware capabilities between the two. So in cases like that, how did you port it to one from one console to another? What kind of tools were you using, and how did you guarantee that you didn't introduce bugs in this porting process, and what kind of testing activities you had there?
For porting between platforms, because the engine was developed in-house, that was all done manually by ourselves. It was mostly all about being careful with abstraction, which parts of game code that are generic that can be used across all the machines. We had layers upon layers of different technologies. So we had the Lego engine at the top, which handled all the Lego specific parts of the game. It knew how to move minifigs around, it knew how the vehicles work, how the Lego building system worked. Underneath that layer, we had a generic game engine that supports all sorts of different types of games, RTS, first-person shooters, etc. Even though we mostly made Lego games with it, it had its own layer specifically for that. Underneath that, we had what's called the framework, which handles, it's one layer above the platform abstraction. So it can deal with things like file loading, serialization across network, gamepad inputs, The sound system was on there. The generic renderer was on there. Underneath that, we had the abstracted layer. So there was a renderer per platform. So we had a renderer for Xbox 360 and Xbox One, which would have been the DirectX 9 and 10 renderers. We had the Wii renderer, we had the Wii U renderer, the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4 renderers, as well as the same for all the different input and output systems. We had abstraction for all the sound systems, the gamepad inputs, the network transfers, things like that. So it was a big pyramid of layers that had to be maintained. It was quite a complicated engine. And like you said, very, very difficult to test for consistency between them all.
Okay, thank you. But still about the testing, did you have like specific QA teams or people who develop would also test? Did you implement automated tests while you were there? I remember that you told me about some machines running the games, I think all day long.
The
and
auto test
stuff.
system, yes. Yes, there's lots of, obviously we had lots of QA members themselves. We had several different QA teams, sometimes per game, sometimes per platform. They shuffled around quite a lot. Different projects had different requirements. But for the most part, it was a big room of testers split into platform desks. So we'd have the Xbox desk, we'd have the PlayStation desk, etc. And their jobs would range depending on the point of the project we're at. So if we were starting a new game, everything would be white box. We wouldn't texture anything so that we could do quick level designs and try and figure out what's fun. And QA's job during that would be to pretty much play the game start to finish and tell us whether or not it's fun, which bits are going to be too hard for our target audience, which is mostly children, which parts are boring, which ones are too complicated, etc. So up until the game itself is finished, ready to polish and bug fix, their job is to just tell us if the games are fun. After that, they switch into a bug fixing mode. So they would try and stress test the game. Probably the most boring part of the job, because they would be doing continuous operations again and again and again. They pick a specific character and test just the jump moves on one particular part of one particular level again and again and again, try and make it fail. Lots of different things like that. They'd have a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of cross-checking against other platforms. Does the jump height behave the same on this platform as it does this platform? Things like that, as well as searching for bugs and crashes and things like that. And they probably continue that probably to the end of the project, up until we have a submission candidate. But in a separate server room, we had, as Barone said, the auto test system, which was a load of rack mount development kits for each console. And their jobs were to, every time somebody made a commit to the game, those machines would spin up and automatically build a package of the game and then deploy them to a spare development machine. And the game would be booted up in a mode that allowed it to test. So for Lego specifically, we had the Lego auto test, which would boot up the game and it would load each level in a row and just let the character stand there for 10 seconds until all the assets had streamed in. And it would take measurements, frame rate, current memory usage, network latency, things like that. And then it would load the next level. And that whole thing was completely automated. So all the program had to do was commit a line of code, and these systems would spin up, build the game, deploy it to all the different test kits, fire it up, and then it would send you back a report at the end saying this level failed to load on the Wii U only, or this level on this game dropped below 20 frames a second on the Xbox 360 only. And it would give us back big graphs and reports, which really allowed us to judge performance over time, because it would give us lots of line graphs, and we could see which builds had spikes in the performance gains and which one had drops. And we could cross-check that against individual commits. So if one particular commit caused the frame rate to drop, down to 20 frames a second, we could pick out the individual commit and place blame on somebody in the company. So an enormous amount of work went into that. It took just over a year to get that entire system right. It was very expensive, and it was a very warm room as well. So yeah, as far as I'm aware, even 10 years after I left the company, they still have that system running on the latest platforms. They'll be moving on to probably PS5 and the new Xbox at some point, so they'll have test systems on their racks already.
Thank you so much. So many interesting details, right, guys? A lot of things to decompress and to think about. Matt, I would like to have a better idea. When you joined the company, do you know how many employees did you have at the time? And the teams that you worked on, how many developers did you have, or how many QA specialists did you have per game or per platform, as you're saying, just to give people an idea of what kind of scale we had there?
When I joined the company around 2009, I think there were around 200 employees. I know they were spread between 2 offices, and I think in our office specifically there were 40 programmers. They were split between teams as well, because we always had so many games in development at any one time, and there would be one engine team who worked just on the engine. I think there were 15 of us on the engine team. And each game itself would have their own game teams as well on top of that. So everything goes through the engine team, because obviously the engine team are making the engine, so all the game teams liaise with the engine team if they want new features and stuff like that. So we had layers of, I wouldn't say hierarchy there, but from a game sense, they'd have the game programmers at the top and then the engine programmers underneath, and everybody would liaise with us. I couldn't say specifics about art departments or QA. I'm not sure. I think at one point we had 30 QA in the QA room. I think that was our busiest time. We were working on 4 games and 1 movie. We did the first Lego Batman movie, which was rendered with our game tech. So I think we had some specialized testers that were testing some of the pieces of software we were writing for the movie rendering. I think that's the most QA we ever had in one room. I'm not sure about the other office. They specialize in handheld, so they did the PSP, the Vita, Nintendo DS games until those platforms became powerful enough that the main engine could run on those, and then we merged them together. So when I joined, yes, around 200 employees, and I think by the time I left in 2013, that almost doubled. There were at least 350 as far as I remember, and they were still hiring when I left.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And I'll try to already cover some of the questions here in the chat. So when you left the university and your first job experience and you entered there, it was very busy, as you're saying. It's a big company, big game, several games being developed at the same time. Did they provide any kind of training for you? And the previous knowledge that you had from the university, which kinds of gaps did you find there between what you needed to do and what you already knew and already had experienced it before?
No formal training. They showed me to my chair and said, "Here you go, get on with it." They didn't even allow employees to have internet access back then, so that was fun. But thankfully, a world of knowledge in the team itself, so you could always drag somebody over if you needed help with anything like that. I think for me personally, that was probably the best way to go about it. I was a little bit nervous on my first day, like, what if there's things I don't really know? What are they going to ask me to do? I don't know. But being thrown into the deep end and actually forced to critically think about the problem I've been given to solve was probably the best for me. It might not work out for everybody, but I quite enjoyed being thrown into a problem with no prior knowledge of it and then figure out how to solve it. They had a lot of books there, so they had things like some of the popular programming books there were GPU gems, lots of rendering techniques in those, OpenGL, DirectX books, things like that. So we had our own little library there of things that were still relevant at the time. Obviously very different now, the internet's taken over a bit more. So yeah, no formal training at TT itself, but that wasn't really a problem because you were surrounded by knowledgeable people. They were always willing to help. And it was useful being thrown into a problem with no prior knowledge. I think I learned a lot more in my first month at TT than I did my entire university course. Because I was thrown into so many different systems, they didn't stick me on one thing and say, you're working on Autotest now, that's it. They gave me audio bugs, they gave me rendering bugs, frame rate improvements, performance analysis, things like that. They gave me lots of little tidbits of different parts of all the engine. And said there's a problem here and here and here and here. Figure out the low-hanging fruit and solve the quickest one first. So I got to explore the engine in its entirety only in the first couple of weeks. It was quite an experience. University itself, the programming module alone prepared me, but that's mostly because of the final project I chose, which was to make my own game engine and tool set. That really helped. I'm not sure how others fared working on pre-made engines. TT might not have been the right company for them from that respect. But yeah, like I said at the start, it's a shame the course was so thinly spread because we only got to learn a little bit of each discipline, a bit of 3D design, a bit of level design, and all the programming I did was mostly in my own time. So yeah, it was a tricky pairing with my course and TT, but it did work out in the end.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Now, something that I think we briefly discussed it before, but so you have 200 people in this company and 40 in the same, let's say, office that you were working. So I can, and you already said that they had, by the time you joined it, they were still using the code base from the PS2 days. So how did you manage a code repository with so many people and with years and years of coding already there? I suppose that you had many millions of lines of codes in there already. And another question that kind of goes along with the chat here, how much of this code was C, C++, or assembly itself? How much of low-level stuff you had in there? Thank you.
The source control was split into code and assets. So for each game, we had an SVN repository to store all the game assets, the models, textures, sound files, things like that. We found SVN was better placed for binary assets that didn't need merging or couldn't be merged. We did try code for SVN at one point, but it wasn't really working with our workflow. Once you get past a certain number of employees all committing the same code base, it tends to get a bit unwieldy. So we eventually settled on a piece of software called Accurev. It wasn't the best, but it solved the problems we had at the time, and that was many employees all hammering the same repository at the same time. And it allowed us a way to do quick branches, which is something I think Git is also good at as well. We had to separate features out into branches. So if we were going to make a major modification to the engine, like upgrade the renderer with a new Bloom implementation or something like that, new post effects, we would quickly branch off and then name that new feature branch for the new effect. And Accurev allowed us a way to drag and drop branches from each other, so we could attach a branch to a different route, do the work there, commit it, and then drag the branch back to another route again, commit it there. So if we had several different branches of the engine and that one feature needed to be put into several different branches of it, we could drag it around, commit, drag it around, commit, drag it around, commit. And that was something that was really useful for our workflow at the time. Because we're working on 4 different games at once, we would branch the engine for each game. So we'd have 4 versions of the engine in develop at any one time, and then eventually it was some poor soul's job to merge them all back to the master route eventually. But all 4 games wanted the new features in, so we'd have to, incrementally commit them to 4 different branches of the engine and resolve all the merges. So SVN was really poor for that, and Acurev solved that problem. I'm not sure I'd use it today. I think some Git extensions have probably overtaken Acurev in its feature set, but at the time it was great. It was a really good system to use. I can't remember the second part of the question.
I think the only thing that I asked more about was like what kind of percentage share you had there between C++, C, assembly
The
code.
languages. Yeah, sure. When I started there, obviously we're still supporting things like PlayStation 2 and some of the handhelds like Nintendo DS and 3DS. A lot of the low-level stuff for those was assembly, specifically things that handled tens of thousands of objects at any one time, lots of iterations. So the particle system would have been in assembly for the PlayStation 2 and the handhelds. But once we started getting onto things like 360 and PS3, we managed to switch all those over to C++, and it was a bit more manageable. So I'd say there was a lot of C in there, lots of legacy C. So I'd say when I started, it was something like 40% C, 40% C++, and the rest would have been assembly, as well as anything for the build script. So we had some Python build scripts and tools like that. But once we dropped the PS2 and we handed the handheld consoles over to another office, we were able to deprecate those older parts of the engine. And gradually, as it went on, it became more and more C++. We started upgrading some of the older C stuff to C++. Or most of the old assembly, apart from specialized little pieces, were rewritten in C++. We also switched to a new build system called Jam+. And we did away with all the hacky Python scripts we had for building. So I'd say about 90% of it was eventually C++, and that's probably gotten more as time goes on. It was tricky upgrading an old code base to C++, mostly because of the way modules worked and the way the build system worked with it. So you'd have one C module rather than classes, and then if you try and mix the two together, it's a little bit painful. But we got there in the end. I'd have preferred to scrap the whole thing and rewrite it, but that's me. But when you're trying to do that for 11 platforms, it's not very sensible. But yeah, it was a scrappy code base, very scrappy.
Well, yeah, for what you're saying, I can just imagine how tough it was. So also to address one of the questions here and to begin to close down this Traveler's Tales chapter of your life, usually how many years or how many months it would take to develop a complete Lego game, for an example, and I don't know how much you could reuse from one game to another, like from Indiana Jones 2 to one of the Harry Potter games. I don't know how you would do that. So if you could tell us a little bit about this, it would be nice. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. When I started there, we'd reuse almost everything. And we'd swap out all the models and textures. The gameplay itself would be probably completely rewritten. One of the big differences between TT Games and other studios is we didn't really have a high-level script system to do any of the gameplay. All of the gameplay was done in C++, and we hired actual C++ programmers to do the gameplay coding. Whereas in modern day languages, we'd have modern day engines, we'd have things like Blueprint or Lua scripting, and we'd have tech artists whose job it would be to do the gameplay parts. Maybe even level designers themselves would get their hands on in scripting. But at TT Games, there was none of that. We had dedicated C++ gameplay programmers who did all the gameplay, which unfortunately meant all the gameplay parts had to be scrapped and rewritten for the new type of game. Because, like you say, Harry Potter would have a completely different move set to Indiana Jones. We couldn't really knock new movements together in script. They'd all have to be redone in C++. But certainly the entire of the base engine would be reused. We had the Lego engine, which was all generic Lego stuff in one layer. That would be completely reused. Anything else we needed, we either bolted onto the Lego engine or we did specifically for that one game. One of the biggest challenges we had was Lego Star Wars 3, the Clone Wars, which had 2 RTS levels in it. And our engine hadn't done any kind of RTS stuff before. So that was quite interesting to do. An entire new genre of game needed engine support, inventory management, unit management, things like that. Lots of timeline-based gameplay rather than real-time gameplay. So that was quite an interesting one to do. That needed a lot of writing for it. As for the time it took to do that, it was anywhere between, I think the quickest was 9 months start to finish. That was Lego Pirates of the Caribbean. That nearly killed the team. I don't recommend making a game in 9 months. All the way up to 2 years. I think some of the bigger titles like Lego Marvel was nearly a 2-year job. That was quite involved. One of the big issues we had was the branding, because we get involved with big companies like Disney, Warner Brothers, Lego, and they all have their own individual brand guidelines and what they think the game should look like. And obviously they always conflict. So we'd have to have lots of boardroom meetings to try and resolve things like what certain things should look like, what characters should sound like and things like that. And for Marvel, that was quite involved. There are a lot of people involved in the decision making there. So we had to do lots of little tests, like make little prototypes of levels and send them off to so many different companies to make sure they approved. And they'd send back a load of notes, and we'd have to make loads of changes and do it again before we settled on final level designs and actually got to make the damn thing. So yeah, Pirates of the Caribbean was really fast, smooth sailing. We knew what we wanted from the start. We're at a good point in the company where the tech was reasonably stable. We just finished the PS4 and Xbox One ports, and they were nice and stable. So fewest bugs, fewest problems. We managed to bash that out in 9 months. But yeah, other projects, we're talking years of time.
Okay, thank you so much. So much interesting information, I think. I'm having a look at all the questions, so to everyone listening to us, don't worry, I'll try to ask all these questions to Matt still during this webinar, don't worry. So to finish off the Traveler's Tales chapter, from all the games that you worked in there, which one do you prefer? And from all the experiences and people that you got to meet in there and talk to, which were the most valuable experiences or contacts that you made while you were working there?
Yeah, my favorite game, Lego City Undercover, which was a Wii U exclusive title. It was our first game shipped on the Wii U. The whole thing was just exciting start to finish. It was my first experience with a new hardware platform. The first time I'd been made to sign NDAs for something secret and upcoming rather than a platform that was already out. So we got to go through different iterations of prototype hardware. Some of them were really scrappy, like there was some bare circuit boards in a black box and things like that. And we had to do our own firmware flashes by attaching stuff to its internals and things like that. It was just amazing to work with early hardware like that. Very scrappy, lots of mistakes made. I learned quite a lot doing that. So the port of the engine to the Wii U was really challenging to do. Lots of problems to solve. I like problems to solve. And the game itself was one of the most interesting we did, because it wasn't an existing license, apart from Lego. It wasn't a Disney or a Marvel IP. It was our own thing. We got to write that game ourselves. And I think that showed the true potential of the company's writing team when they were allowed to properly let loose with a project and write their own stuff. It was a very funny game. It's got a special place in my heart, that one. I really love it. As for the people and experiences, anything I got to do on the engine, I took away with me. I didn't particularly enjoy the gameplay coding itself, or some of the bug hunting and fixing. Actual feature game, actual engine feature stuff was really where I shone, and it's the kind of thing I've enjoyed ever since. So pretty much pick anybody from the engine team, and they kind of been my hero there. They taught me a lot. We used to call it the engine room there. Anybody in that department were just wonderful people.
Okay, thank you so much. So in Traveler's Tales, you had this history and some people which were from those magic days of Mickey Mania, Toy Story, and many games on the PlayStation. I think Muppet Racing Mania and stuff like that, which are all hardware pushing games. And each one of them, I think, has a very special history to the communities they are attached to. And then you moved to Crytek UK, which also had a special history behind it, because I think they were pre-radical design before, right? And pre-radical design were mostly composed of ex-Rare employees and Rare, and the guys that basically had developed GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64, Perfect Dark, and then the Time Splitter series afterwards for the PlayStation 2. So when you joined this other company with a lot of history, and of course, I think at the time you joined there, they had already developed and released Crisis, which is, I think, probably for our audience here, the most well-known game from them. How was the environment there, and what you're looking for as well when you joined there?
It was very calm, I'd say. Like I said, TT was busy, scrappy. Crytek were only ever working on one game at a time, which really helped. It was a lot calmer environment. It was also a lot more focused. So I wasn't moving around different games every week. I got one to focus on. Everybody had their eye on the prize, just the one game at a time, which was just an amazing change of environment. It was really different. It also means that everybody in the company is knowledgeable on that one title, so you can ask anybody. Whereas at TT Games, if you had a question about a specific game, you'd have to go and find somebody not busy who was working on that specific game. You couldn't just ask anybody in the company. Whereas at Crytek, everybody was working at the time. It was Homefront 2, or what became Homefront: The Revolution. You wanted to ask a Homefront question, you could ask anybody in the building, which was a real big help. It was organized a bit differently. There were less hierarchies of command there. It was a lot more flat. They're also very experimental. Whereas at TT, you're afraid of breaking anything. You didn't really want to do anything experimental. It was difficult to try out new features or prototype new ideas. At Crytek, they encouraged all of that. they would let you take a few days out of your time to trial something experimental if you think it would help the game. So everybody had their own favorite little experiments going on. One of the things I was tasked to work on were the flying robots in the game. Definitely not ripped out of Half-Life 2 at all. The things that come and take your photo and warn the police if you're doing anything crazy. And I had a lot of ideas about how to change their behavior and how to make them fly a little differently and things like that. And that kind of stuff, that kind of experimentation was encouraged. So I was told, yeah, if you want to try and change their flying behavior, you go and give it a go. Let's see what it looks like. We'll see you in a meeting next week. And I really enjoyed that element of Crytek. It's a very different environment.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned home from the revolution. I think you worked a lot on this game, right?
Yeah.
And especially there is even a PC Gamer article about it and in many other outlets about the Time Splitters 2 Easter egg hidden in it. And I think you have something to do with it. Can you tell us about this, please?
I thought this might come up. Yeah, when I started the company, there was this myth that somebody had ported Time Splitters 2 to work with CryEngine, and that somewhere hidden in the game was a secret arcade cabinet that you could insert a coin in and start the game up. And when I joined, it was told like it was some kind of myth. I was like, yeah, no, nobody's going to take the time out to do that, not at all. And I don't think I ever saw it working there. So I just kind of brushed it off, really. But one of the employees was leaving, and he gave me the source code to it and said, this is real. It does actually work. Do you want to try and finish it off? I'm like, yeah, I want to try and finish this off. So we got it back out of the box. We got it working. It was great seeing it boot up for the first time in this little arcade machine. It was amazing. I think at the time we talked to the heads at Crytek and asked if we can have this in the game proper, and they agreed. So we started working on it properly. I got tasked to port it to PS4 and Xbox One, which was great. I did most of it in my spare time, sort of after hours kind of thing, because we had higher priorities during the normal day. But yeah, it eventually became canon, and then everybody started getting tasks to, polish it up a bit, add new features and things like that. And it was really good. Unfortunately, we split from Crytek. We got bought out by our publisher and became Dambuster Studios. Unfortunately, that meant we couldn't put the whole game in there. We just had to have the first 2 levels in, which was a shame. But at one point, we did have the whole game running, which was nice. But yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things I've ever worked on. It was an Easter egg inside another game. It wasn't even a full game. I still prefer working on that to anything else in my career. It was quite something.
Okay, and yes, for those listening to us and watching us here, Time Splitters 2 is a pretty legendary game as well. As it says here in the article, it was a defining game for PS2, GameCube, Xbox, and it was never available on the PC. So that's one of the big deals about having it as an Easter egg in a PC game, was also to be able to, for the first time, play this massive console classic in the PC. So people here are asking about your own game studio and stuff like that. So I will try to transition to that phase, but I need to give a bit of context here. So I think still in your Traveler's Tales days, back in 2012, you started your Mega Drive blog, where you shared with us your experience of trying to learn how to code for the Mega Drive, how to develop for it. And When we reach 2016, more specific, November, you launched a Kickstarter campaign for a game that would be called Tanglewood, which is a 2D platformer with many puzzle elements. I would say that it's a really special game because while I know that you're a fan of Limbo, which is a very good game and very well known from the PC audience. It also brings back a lot of, I don't know how to say it, but probably atmospheric elements from games like Flashback, The Lion King, Another World, several classics, and especially Flashback and Another World, which were also European games, and you added the physics, a little bit of the physics and the controls of a Sonic game that I know you are a big fan of. So tell us about this, how this dream started, and how you ended up having the idea or the push to go for a Kickstarter, and then I will continue from the Kickstarter on afterwards. Okay, thank you.
Yep, sure thing. Well, yeah, it started in around 2012. They still had some of the old school programmers at Traveller's Tales where I was working. So Mega Drive was a big topic of discussion there day to day. I told them I'd always wanted to make a game for the Mega Drive. It's just one thing I wanted to do growing up, and they planted the idea in my head that I should just do it. So they gave me some hints and tips on how to get started. So I started with basic writing, assembly code in a text editor, and using an emulator. And I started that blog just as purely as a log to help me remember everything I'd learned. It wasn't even supposed to be public. It was just a log of my experiences and where I'd gone wrong and things like that, just some reference to refer back to. And then I came across the opportunity to buy an original Sega Mega Drive development kit from a now closed down site called Assembler Games, which is where old hardware was bought and sold. And I couldn't pass up that opportunity. It was like a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I went for it. It wasn't cheap. But yeah, that took probably 6 to 8 months to actually figure out how to use. It was incomplete. I had to buy more parts for it. I had to go for repair. I had to find the manuals of software, an original MS-DOS computer that could run the thing. It was a real nightmare, but finally, after nearly a year later, I actually got the thing fired up and running my own code. That was a real catalyst to carry on. So from then on, I did all my work on the development kit and managed to get some basic things together, some sprites on screens, some scrolling working. Got a little platformer character running about. I think at one point I even ripped some sprites from Sonic and had Sonic the Hedgehog running around. And it was never meant to be anything big. I just wanted to make a small game just to say I'd done it. So I had some friends help me out with the artwork, doing pixel art and things like that. And we got this basic idea together. And I released some YouTube videos of my progress, and they just took off. They went almost viral. People share them around on Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. People hadn't seen a new game for the Mega Drive in a very long time. I think they're really excited about this. So some friends of mine convinced me to take it seriously and said you should, not do a small little game. You should actually do a full-fledged title for it. So they got the idea of a Kickstarter into my head. So I knuckled down, got a full prototype together, released that first level for free, and then started the Kickstarter. And that took off and it completed. And I still to this day don't understand how it got over the finish line. You're all crazy. Whoever backed it, you're all crazy. But that was a big career change for me, because I actually planned ahead how I was going to do this. I was still working for Crytek at the time. So I had to quickly think about how I was going to manage my work and my spare time and mix it together, and eventually figured out I had enough to actually quit my full-time job and do this properly, to give it the time it deserved. So from then on, I hired an artist, a composer, a level designer, and actually started taking it seriously and put a full game design document together and got this thing properly off the ground. And then I met Baroni, who had a rather big part to play in this. It was his idea to form a Discord channel to invite a load of beta testers in, and they considerably helped me improve the game. They did a lot of testing for me, lots of feedback, lots of design changes. Without Barone, it wouldn't be the game it was today. So yeah, he had a big part to play
That's
there.
very nice of you, but that's not true. Well, the game he's talking about is this game. It's Tanglewood. I have it here, so it's real. How many copies, actual Mega Drive copies, have you sold of this game here?
Physical copies, 2,000.
And these 2,000 copies, I think you manually sold the ships.
I think 800 were done in a factory. The other 1,200 are manually soldered. So yeah, 24 pins per cartridge. That's a lot of pins I've soldered in the past year or so.
Yeah, this is the I think collector's edition, which was just for the backers, right? And I managed to snag this one when you're getting rid, let's say, of the remaining ones. But I mean, this project was extremely successful in many aspects, in my humble opinion, because first of all, you had nearly 900 backers on Kickstarter for a Mega Drive game. At the time, we didn't have any Kickstarter Mega Drive project nearly as successful as yours, and you're aiming at I don't remember the original goal if it was 45 or 50,000 British pounds, but it was seen as a absurd amount, let's say, not for how much the game would cost, because we know it's extremely difficult, but to get this from this, let's say, small community, which are people still interested in retro games, and especially in Mega Drive games and in physical copies of these games, which is a whole other thing. But you managed to do it, and the Kickstarter ended up with around 55,000 British pounds accumulated from the backers, which is hugely successful. You also managed to release the game 2 years after the conclusion of the Kickstarter, and I think everyone got pleased with the release. I know that you worked very hard to get high quality cartridge, and there's a lot of specifics into it about the electronics, and it's very difficult to get the proms and everything. I remember that period. But you also managed to have some pretty positive critics feedback, like you have 79 in Metacritic, 80 on OpenCritic. Many reviews around the world about this game. The Linux community kind of embraced it a little bit as well, because when you released it for the Mega Drive, but you simultaneously release it on Steam, and already packed in with a custom emulator that I think your friends on I don't know now. I think they were from Traveler's Tales that they had developed this emulator that you ended up using, and you also got to release the game on GOG.com, which for the people in here is not something easy, especially for 2D platformers. They are very strict about this. If you go there, you'll see the catalog. It's basically just the classics and the very best of the indie releases. So you managed to accomplish a lot with this project, right? So outside of all these details in this journey, what did you enjoy the most, and what were the most valuable lessons that you learned?
What did I enjoy the most? Probably the engine programming again. Writing my own tools for the whole thing was quite enjoyable, because despite using original 90s development hardware to make the engine, it wasn't really feasible to use like Amigas and the paint programs they had on there for the pixel art and level design and things like that. So I wrote my entire modern tool suite for it in C++, level design tools, graphics tools, sound tools, things like that. And I really enjoyed getting all that together and getting all that working for the first time. It's such a joy to be able to make a quick test level in a tool you wrote and click export and then see it actually assemble and show up on a real Mega Drive. It's such an insane feeling. Even today, I've been writing new tests for the next game that I'm working on, and just being able to fire that up on a real Mega Drive just brings out the kid in me. It's just an amazing thing. So yeah, definitely writing the engine and the tools itself was really good. The gameplay itself was mostly experimental. I've not designed a game myself on that level before. I've done little tests before, I've made some games, but something big and story driven like this was kind of a new goal for me. So that was quite cool as well, seeing what worked, what didn't, trying little mechanics in little test levels, getting the AI working for the first time. There was a lot of firsts. Seeing it run on the Mega Drive for the first time, seeing the AI work for the first time, getting some artwork off the scene designer and seeing that in game for the first time. Pretty much every first along the way was really exciting. Getting the audio working for the first time, having it in the hands of a tester for the first time. It was just amazing. So it was the second part.
I think you covered pretty much what I asked. Thank you. So you're referring to the AI. I think the closest thing that you would have to that AI, especially on Mega Drive games, would be something like what we have on Sonic 3, where if you play with Sonic and Tails will follow you to some extent, but it's much more crud, let's say, less advanced than what you implemented on Tanglewood. I think in many aspects, I think it's more advanced than anything we had seen before on the Mega Drive in terms of a character AI. So it's very interesting. People were asking about some tools here. One of the questions that I don't want to leave unanswered: if you ever used the Godot game engine.
Yes, I have. Yes, I did a lot of research last year because another game I'm making is going to be full 3D. We're trying to research the right tool for the job. So we tried every off-the-shelf engine, Unreal 4, Unity, Godot, probably some other lesser known ones. Well, we also looked into making our own from a toolkit. So using the Ogre 3D renderer bolted onto other sound systems and input systems and things. And yeah, we used Godot for quite a bit to try and create a prototype with. Really interesting tool set, really cool piece of hardware. The only reason we backed off it was because it wasn't primitive to port to PS4 and Xbox One. There would have been quite a lot of work to do that, so we didn't go with Godot in the end. But yeah, I do have experience with it. Very cool little engine.
Thank you. So to begin to close down our chat here today, our webinar. You, with this real SDK that you have for the Mega Drive, you did your own game, but you also helped in some, let's say, legendary tasks, because I think you helped to put together the Strike Games trilogy for the Sega CD or the Mega CD in your area, which were believed to be long lost and never possible ever to get together. For those who don't know what I'm referring to Desert Strike, Urban Strike, and Jungle Strike games from Electronic Arts. They were released for both the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo at the time. And there was an unfinished, unreleased version for the Mega CD. And at some point, I think people found the disc with the source code or something, and you helped them to get this working. So this is for the community now, for the Mega Drive freaks out there. It was very special, I think. And more recently, you also worked on another project which saved from the never, another game that had been talked for many years, which was Hardcore, an unreleased game from 1994 from DICE. And it's the DICE that you guys are thinking about, the DICE behind the Battlefield games. I think they are mostly known today by this. But back in the 90s, they were coding games, developing games for the Amiga. They had a very successful series of pinball games, Pinball Illusions and Pinball Dreams. I don't remember the name now, but this is a very special series of pinball games. The Amiga guys love this. And they had this game, which is a run and gun game, a Contra-esque game, a Turrican-esque game. I think it's closer to Turrican, actually, which they had developed and never released it. And then you also got involved with this project. Tell us just a little bit of this, because Ultra Core, it was then renamed to Ultra Core, and it was released for the PS4, the Nintendo Switch, several platforms, and also for the Mega Drive very recently. So if you could talk to us a little bit about this, please.
Yeah, sure. I didn't do a lot on Ultra Core. I was there from the start. We had several programmers all trying to figure out how to get started, what kind of state the code base was in, how we're going to improve it, what kind of tools we needed to finish it. Lots of high-level poking around trying to figure out some of this code base. Most of the comments were in German. Some of it was incomplete. There was also a fabled Mega CD level for it, because back in the 90s they started porting this to the Mega CD and had extra levels. So there was a lot of trying to figure out how to port those back to the Mega Drive and what to do with them and things like that. Yeah, they contacted me out of the blue. They said, I've got Mega Drive experience. Do you want to join this team and release an unreleased game? Well, yeah, sure I do. That'd be great. It kind of tailed off towards the end. I didn't get to do as much on hardcore as I wanted to, but it was a fantastic experience overall. Really interesting code base, and I'm glad it turned out really well.
Okay. Our webinar here is something, as I said to you, for our developers, testers, our local community here of students from the universities and other people related to IT, which usually follow us on social media. And thank you very much for being here today with us. I still didn't finish, but I'm saying this because it's very nice of you to be here today and to offer your time to us to share all this knowledge and this very valuable and I think very rare experience with all of us. One of the things that you did about Tanglewood, you opened the source code after a year after its release, right? And you are now also developing a new game for the Mega Drive, besides your NDA stuff that I don't know even if I should ask about what kinds of other games you're working now. But I know that you have another project now from Big Evil Corp, your own studio, and that you also have the code base on GitHub now and stuff like that. So tell us a little bit why you think it's important to share the source code, to share the knowledge, to share your experience, please.
It was important to me to share the source because this started out as a community project and I wanted it to kind of end as a community project. I didn't get that game released on my own. There were so many different people involved. Never mind the 900 Kickstarter backers who helped me. There were people on forums who helped me with coding. Right back to the early days when I didn't really know what I was doing, there were a lot of people answering questions that I had and trying to help me out with it. I looked at other open source code bases for some inspiration or tips. There were the testing crew who did all this off their own backs. So many different people cheering me on, sending me nice messages, words of encouragement, all the press that covered it. And I wouldn't have finished the game without all these people. So I really, really wanted to, give it back as a community project as it started as a community project. So I opened the source up. It's for everybody to look at. I want everybody to see their contribution is in there somewhere.
Okay. And to all of the youngsters out there and the people watching us now, if you could tell us, I don't know, give us some tips or some advice on what you think is important for you as a developer, as a professional. How do you like to carry yourself in your career and things that you think are important to work as a team and stuff like that, please?
Well, it's incredibly important to work as a team. One thing I won't do again is stay shut in a home office to develop the next game. That really, it does something to your mental health that I wouldn't stay shut in an office over 2 years to develop a game. So next I want to have some real employees, have a real team there, not 24/7 obviously. Have a real team there during the working day. People to bounce ideas off, people to stop you going insane, basically. So yeah, I from the start I quite like being an indie developer, sort of on my own, just coding from my sofa and things like that. But the novelty wears off really quickly, and it's a lot better to get a proper team. So I'll be doing that next time for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. And just the last question now. I know we already went over a lot, but we have a community here which is called Fellowship of the Game from the University of São Paulo. I know the guys will be watching, and they were helping us to promote this with the young audience as well. Some people are curious about things that you need to know or need to do to get your own studio started. If you could give some advice to the people that are watching us now and wants to develop their own games. For an example, the Fellowship of the Game, if you check on itch.io, they have several games already developed there. They have like games they develop to train the new guys and stuff like that. So if you could give us some advice, please.
I think it's quite difficult to start your own studio without a game behind it. Tanglewood came before the company. I had the game mostly in a working state. I ran the Kickstarter and it was successful. And then I was in a place where I was able to start Big Evil Corporation, do that. I would be worried about how difficult it would be to do the other way around, trying to start a company from fresh with no game, trying to acquire funding for that, trying to hire employees, and then figure out what you're going to do from there. So if you've already got an existing set of games, they're already being sold, and you've got some sort of base to launch from, I think you'd be in a very good position to open an indie studio probably from there. I'd be careful the other way around. If you can do as much up front as you can, if you can get some prototype funding to make the game, get the game functional beforehand, get people interested, see what the press think, and then you'll launch your studio off the back of that. I think you'd probably fare a lot better doing something like that.
Okay, with that, I thank you very, very much, Matt, for being here with us today. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of valuable information here, and people will be able to rewatch this if they want. I know that some people had subscribed to this webinar, but maybe this is a time that they are working on and they will check this out later on today. So thank you very much. I know that this will be a day that at least I will remember a lot, because this will have a very positive impact in my colleagues at Monitora, especially with the younger guys. I think they look up to people like you. So we gave us very nice and very important advices and information today. And I would like to invite people that are watching us to our webinar next week, the webinar number 6, which will be about QA. We'll have 3 people that are very, very experienced with quality assurance, answering questions. So it will be a Q&A session with Elisa Hernandes, Leonardo Miyake, and Renata Bianchi. So if you have any doubts about quality assurance, please join us next week. I think it will be on Thursday. And well, in the name of my colleagues and Monitora, I thank you. And I thank everyone who helped us to make it happen today. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, guys. Thank you.